I've jumped back to the render cam. I'm going to turn on the floor and we're going to work on getting this cobblestone texture in. Drop down another material network. Jump inside RS material. Floor out. Take an RS texture. Let's load that floor texture in. And I got this floor texture from Megascans. And it looks like this. So I think we can take the 8K version, which is this one here. Takes a little bit longer to load. It's pretty large image. So the reason I chose this, well, it was pretty obvious really. I'm just trying to match the tiles or the cobblestones on the floor, and I can sort of make out that they're kind of squarish. We can see here maybe that there's some reflection going on, or maybe some dust. And there's a fair amount of variation in color. So it's not all uniform, it's not all one color. So that's one thing we should consider. But I think that the Megascans cobblestone texture is a really good place to start. So we'll load him in. Repeat the same process that we did for the other RS texture nodes. Import our normal map. We'll plug the, actually we'll just chuck this on there with the basic grey shader so we can see what it looks like. Open up the render view. Hit play. Yeah, and I think we can stick in the look dev camera. That looks kind of cool. It's taking a little bit of time to render there. That's kind of slow. Let's try viewing from the render cam. It's a little bit faster. Let's plug in our albedo map into the diffuse slot. Refresh the render. And looks like we get a crash. So we're going to continue where we left off. Okay, so I'm back. I've reloaded Houdini. Just I redid those steps. Just to mention that these aren't Megascan textures, they're actually they're from textures.com. So I've loaded in the roughness map, and I only downloaded a 1K version of this roughness map. Everything else is 8K. So for example, the normal map, the albedo map, and the height map. So currently we've just got the albedo plugged in. Let's change the BRDF to GGX. We'll slide that up to make it a little bit rougher. We need to increase the scale. I think I'll put this to something like 12 for now. Let's see what that looks like. And this is a pretty big texture. I'm also going to make sure I've got the render cam ticked. Just do a refresh that. And the way I usually gauge this is by going up to the object a little bit closer and just sort of looking at the area towards the bottom of the legs. I actually think that's looking about right. I don't think that's looking too bad. And it's looking pretty good considering the fact that we've not even added normal map or displacement mapping yet, or even a roughness map. So let's plug in that roughness map. We'll go back to the render cam. Plug in the roughness map. Also plug in the normal map, see what that does for us. Take a snapshot, turn it off. Just going to cut that line a moment. There you go. So maybe it's a little bit too strong, but it's definitely adding some nice detail in there. Let's half the intensity, just so it's nice and subtle. And what we want to do now is enable displacement. So to get displacement working more or less in any render, you need to go to the object, and we need to subdivide this geometry at render time to give the displacement map enough subdivisions and geometry to displace the map itself. So you can see here that the geometry on the ground is fairly subdivided already, so we're not going to need to subdivide this too much. So I find starting off with a subdivision level of around 3 is fine, and then I just work my way up. We'll use the look dev cam for this. Lock the camera, move in. I'm going to move in fairly close to the floor. So once we've enabled tessellation, we're subdividing this geometry by 3. So we're subdividing it 3 times over. And lastly, we need to scroll down and make sure we've got enable displacement. And I usually set these, I usually leave these values at 1. Next thing we need to do is take the height map, so the displacement map, pipe this into an RS displacement node here. Set the file name. And this is where we adjust the scale. And what I always do is change the new range min and new range max to minus 0.5 and 0.5. As usually the middle point value set when these textures are made is usually middle grey. So let's plug that into the displacement slot. Take a snapshot and we'll hit render. I'm going to turn off the normal map for now. And you'll notice we've got no displacement there, and that's because we've turned it off in the ROP. So that's something to consider. So we'll go over to optimizations, global overrides, and we'll enable tessellation and displacement. Now we get this happening. I'm just going to refresh the render to make sure that that's working. So that's looking pretty cool. We're going to half, I think actually we'll do a quarter the amount, so 0.25. And that's looking pretty cool. And that's only 3 subdivision levels. So just remember, the more subdivision levels you add, the longer this is going to take to render. So let's go back, we'll save a snapshot. I'll turn this down to 1. So you can see that we're losing a lot of detail there. So there's not enough resolution in our geometry to support this displacement map. Take a snapshot, we'll go up to 2. So it's looking even more detailed. Take a snapshot, go up to 3. And this sort of method actually shows you how many subdivision levels we need. So we can say that we definitely need 3 because we're noticing visible changes each time we increase this amount. Save again, go up to 4. See, startup time was a little bit slower then. So we're getting even more detail there. Snapshot 5. See, we're getting more shape around sort of these whole areas. So 5 seems to be working quite nicely there. Take a snapshot. 6. Wait for that to load. So you can see at 6 subdivision levels, this is taking a little bit more time to start up. There you go, it's just started. And I'm not really seeing a massive difference here. So we can actually see that maybe a subdivision level of 6 is not quite worth it. We're seeing a slight change. But is it really worth that extra render time? So my answer to that is no. So we found the optimal level, which is at 5. So I've just switched back to the render cam, and it looks like the displacement is a touch too intense. So we're just going to turn that down, I think, to something like 0.175. Take a snapshot so we can compare before and after. So it's not too much of a difference, and I think that's looking a little bit more natural. So if you ever find that you're losing shape with your displacements, then what you could do as well is stick a light sort of in at an angle, and you can maybe highlight some of the edges, just providing that it's subtle. So that's another way to make the displacement stand out a little bit more. But really we should be faithful to sort of what this is in real life. I think that's looking cool. Let's take a look at the concept image and we'll compare. So I think that's looking pretty nice. The color's off, so we'll make a change to the color. Take a snapshot. We'll affect the albedo. So we'll drop down an RS color correct. Restart the render. And to be a little bit faster, we could turn off these settings for now. And I think I'll just drag over an area like this. So shift, left click and drag. I'm just going to shift this towards the yellow. Just going to increase the contrast, the saturation. What we can do as well is add the concept image to the inside of this material network, which is really cool. So let's add that in. Go to the job, concepts, final image. Add that in. Once you're done, you can press Ctrl I to exit the tool. So I think that's looking kind of cool. Let's drop saturation back down. It's not made a huge change. I think that's looking kind of cool. We can also try adding some contrast to the floor. Drop the gamma down a touch. So we can see that we've gone from this sort of purpley magenta looking tone to a more sort of warm yellowish tone, which I think looks a little bit better. I can't remember my exact value that I used, but I think that's looking kind of cool. We need to be careful about how dark this is getting, so I'm going to disable this. And this looks a little bit lighter, so the original one looks a little bit lighter. Let's just boost up those levels just a touch to match the brightness of this, and I think that looks about right. We'll turn back on tessellation and enable the displacement. See what it looks like. Refresh the render. Yeah, I think that's looking kind of nice. I think we can probably push this more towards orange. Maybe somewhere around there. Try that. Let's disable it, see what effect that had. Looking back of the concept, and that's definitely getting there. I think the rest of that will leave down to the lighting. We can add some more variation, I think, in color on the surface. we could take an RS texture, let's look for some grunge. See what we got in this folder. Let's look at the second one. Preview that. It's kind of looking cool, but there's sort of like these water or leaking lines there. I'm not sure we want that. I think this map is the one that we used earlier. Yeah, I think this will be fine. So we'll load this in. We can use an RS, I think it's called an RS color mix. So we're going to mix in a little bit of color here. Using an RS color constant. And then we're going to mix that in using this mask. Just going to move them up, give us a little bit more space. Throw that in the mix amount, and then we'll make this sort of like a maybe like a brownie color or something, and we're going to have a play around with this. Let's tile this texture. View it on its own. We'll turn off the displacement for now, we don't need to see that. And as we usually do, chuck an RS change range down, refresh the render, increase the contrast a little bit. So where there's white, that's where we sort of will be mixing the color in with the original texture map. Yeah, that's looking cool. Yeah, I think that looks nice. I'll change this to red for now, so we can actually see it. Looks like we need to plug this in. Refresh the render. And I think we might need to increase the contrast just a touch. What we need to do is invert this map. There you go. So we're getting different patches here of color. I think I'll change this to kind of like maybe like a lighter color, something more sandy or stony. That's looking kind of cool. yeah, that looks pretty interesting to me. If you want to push this up even more, then all we need to do is scale the white up to something, like crazy, just to demonstrate it. But I think 1 actually works quite well, so what we'll do is disable this. Take a look at it. Without, I think, take a snapshot, and we'll just plug this in to view it. There you go. So we're getting a really interesting amount there. Some nice variation in the diffuse. It's really cool. Let's plug this back in. Refresh the render. I'm just going to keep looking back and forth. I think we can actually increase the saturation on this map. So we'll increase the contrast just a touch. And we'll also increase the saturation scale. There you go, now we're talking. So it's definitely getting there. A lot of color is coming from sort of like the bounce light. So when we have things like the canopy in the shot, we've got this yellow building, we've got the pink building, orange building. All of this light is bouncing on these colored surfaces. It's bouncing around, reflecting colored light. So I think naturally this will look a little bit more saturated when we have all of the assets in the scene. So that's looking pretty cool for the diffuse. Let's add some dirt sort of in between the cracks, I think. So we'll take an RS curvature node. We'll plug this in to the surface, and for this to work we need to enable the displacement again, because this RS curvature is based on the geometry at render time. So we'll go back, turn this on. I'm just going to do a quick save. So here you go. Looks like we need to reduce the radius significantly. Let's try something like that for now. It's got this really interesting effect. It looks really cool. Tighten that up. We'll go to something like 64 samples. And now I'm thinking, where would the dirt collect? So we'd have like dirt on the top of the surface collecting from people walking. But I guess the dirt will collect sort of really in the crevices. Let's change it to concave, see the effect we get, and I think that's sort of what we're looking for there, so we set this to concave. Yeah, I think that's looking quite nice. Let's try reducing the radius even more. And I think we just pushed it a little bit too much there. Maybe go up to 0.3. That looks quite nice. We'll do as we did before with the chair. And we'll take that texture map from here. And we'll multiply in this texture map with the curvature node to give some breakup in these sort of solid lines produced by the curvature node. I think actually we'll just copy it down, gives us more control. Add an RS change range afterwards to increase the contrast. Slide this up. It's looking cool. We can add another RS change range right at the end to really boost up the white levels in this mask here. Refresh the render. Let's boost that up to something like 10. It's looking kind of cool. Maybe 5. We'll create an RS material. This will be our dirt, so I think we'll just copy and paste what we did before. So the dirt from here. I tried to reuse as many materials as possible to save me the effort of redoing it over and over again. We need a material blender. Whoops, so an RS material blender. The base is our floor. The layer above that is our dirt, and the mask blending between these two materials is the mask we just created using the RS curvature node and our roughness node multiplied in with that curvature node. Plug that in, hook this up to the final shading group, move our displacement down. I usually push it out to here. Press Ctrl I will move the concept image out. Ctrl I again to exit the tool. R on the keyboard to render the full view, and we'll refresh the render. I'm going to take a snapshot. I'm going to turn this to 0, so the mask is essentially not working. And it kind of looks like it's not doing too much here. So we've got our dirt, everything seems to be fine there. We've got our floor out, we've got the displacement going in. Yeah, that seems to be looking fine to me. Let's take another snapshot and we'll put this to like 100. There you go. So we got some interesting patterns forming there. You can actually see it's made it look more three-dimensional. It's given it even more shape. It's looking kind of flat. Then we add the dirt in, sort of in the cracks and on top of the surface. So even in these kind of divots, it's adding dirt in. Very cool. So I think we'll leave that as is. I mean, 100 is definitely way too much. So I think if you go beyond a certain value, it's probably not going to do anything. So if we load this to 10, we might not see any difference. Ah, we do. 50. Yeah, I think around 50 is fine. So that's looking really cool. We could add a layer of dirt, sort of like general wear of the surface. So we could take this texture again, the roughness texture, from here. We'll copy and paste it. And instead of layering this up again and sort of replugging in the dirt map and then adding in another mask, what we can do is we can just add, so we can generate a mask again for the dirt on top of all these tiles, which would be sort of caused by people walking on it. So we can generate that now. Let's load it in. Let's offset this. And I kind of want this to be quite subtle. We'll also increase the contrast. We don't want it everywhere. We just want it sort of in patches. and we can add these white values in with these white values. So we're sort of just adding it on top. So we'll add an rs add and add them together. Plug this in this time. Let's take a snapshot, see what we're looking like. So now we've got, you can see it coming through, we've got sort of sections of dirt on top of the cobblestone. So that's looking really cool. So it's kind of subtle, but it is there, and that will sort of help the realism. We've also, I'm going to click R so it renders everything, and take a snapshot, and we're going to turn on the normal map as well to help boost the detail. There you go, that's looking really cool, and that helps make it look a little bit more three-dimensional. It adds shape, and we're always looking for shape. We don't want anything to look flat. Yeah, I think that's looking nice. So let's compare it to the concept, and I think that's pretty damn close. Yeah, I think that's looking really cool.